There are hundreds of documents that could help prove this conspiracy. Why are they being withheld or burned by the government? All these documents are yours. The people's property. You pay for it. But because the government considers you children who might be too disturbed or distressed to face this reality, or because you might possibly lynch those involved, you cannot see these documents for another 75 years.
That scene is particularly relevant this week. The movie and the conspiracy speculation that it generated led to the 1992 law known as the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act, which requires that more than 3,000 previously classified documents and parts of 30,000 others must be made public by the law's 25th anniversary, which is this Thursday, October 26th.
This is such an interesting story. The National Archives releasing some, though not all, of the long secret files relating to the 1963 assassination of President JFK. President Trump blocked the release of nearly 300 records on the urging of the CIA and the FBI. Those files are going to be under review for another 6 months. And by the way, they were held back because of national security concerns. What does that mean?
I welcome this kind of examination.
You are free to do as we tell you. You are free to do as we tell you.
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Back and to the left. Back and to the left.
That's why I don't read the newspaper. I'm a man. I'm 40.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency.
As of now, I am in control here in the White House.
This is crack cocaine from the White House. It could easily have been heroin or PCP. It's as innocent looking as candy.
Good evening, this is Mae Bressel in Carmel, California.
Anybody who's not willing to change based on what they learned is ignorant.
Coffee's for closers only.
I think we're giving you enough.
On to Chicago and let's win there.
Keep hope alive, keep hope alive, keep hope alive.
This is the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hi, this is Brad Schreiber. You're listening to the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm S.T. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing and traversing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, the court historians, and the textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight, we'll have episode 109, David Denton, the JFK Historical Group, and Olney 2019. Our guest tonight is the professor, David Denton. He'll join us next in the midnight hour. But first, let's clean this castle, shall we? Now, you can still make single donations through PayPal, which we have a link to on the website, midnightridernews.com. But we also now have a Patreon account with various tiers, and it's a pretty neat thing, and we're excited about the possibilities to interact more with the audience there. And having the tiers allows us to do so based upon the donations. So if you want to help us do that, it's patreon.com/midnightridernews. That's patreon.com/midnightridernews. I'd like to let you know again that the Center for Deep Political Research is out there and doing a wonderful job in trying to affect change within this community. But for it to work like it can, and like I know that it should, it needs help. And look, I know it seems like every organization or show or magazine for that matter needs help in its funding, but that's because they do. You know, we aren't funded like the networks, we're not funded like the cable news stations, and to be honest, we aren't even funded like the local newspapers in small towns. Almost every organization or show in this community is fully funded out of its own pockets, which means our own paychecks from other work. And yes, absolutely, we took on that responsibility whenever we started these ventures. Totally agree. But for this to all work like it should, and for this to benefit everyone, we have to be working as a team. So if you want to know what you can do for the CDPR, the Center for Deep Political Research, or if you just want to see who we are, you can go to cdpresearch.org. That's cdpresearch.org. And believe me, Jeff Worster really spends an impressive amount of personal time and energy and finances making sure that that site is up to par so that you can learn more about us and what we do. He does an excellent job. So feel free to go over to cdpresearch.org and take a look. We'll be right back with the professor, David Denton.
This is Richard Bartholomew of the Center for Deep Political Research. For more on the future of JFK assassination research, the deep political realities of the 2016 general election, and the research regarding the Mac Wallace fingerprint allegedly in the Texas School Book Depository, listen to episode 70 of the Midnight Rider News Show.
Professor David Denton is one of the few educators in America who teaches a truthful class on the political assassinations of the 1960s. He does so at Olney Central College in Olney, Illinois. Now, he and Ed Tatro helm the JFK Historical Group, which puts it in very capable and knowledgeable hands. David is also on the board of directors of the Center for Deep Political Research, and he should be. He's a good writer. He's genuinely interested in the truth. He's a fine speaker, and of course, a congenial compadre and fellow Illinoisan. Go Illini. So, David, how are you this evening?
Great, Steve. Great to hear from you again.
Well, David, it's nice to have you on for the first time. Now, you and I have met up a few times, and we've had a few long phone conversations. And I always find you fascinating and a really good listen because you do so many things that I respect and admire. Now, we're going to talk about those tonight, but I always start a JFK-themed episode by asking someone how they first became interested in the case. Now, the stories vary so much, and I think so many of them are so personal and so revealing about the person and how they got into the field. So what first captured your interest, and who did you enjoy reading?
Well, it came as, I think, I've always been interested in history. I'm a longtime history teacher. I'm a history professor now at a college. I used to teach in high school. It actually was as simple as walking into a library and picking up a book about the Kennedy assassination in the late 80s. I think it was the Canfield and Weberman book. I don't know if you recognize that name. It may not be the most outstanding text on the JFK assassination, but I had some peripheral information about it, and it just really dawned on me after I read that book that, things aren't what they seem to be here. That this is just another example where, maybe our government has not told us the truth, or, as Jim Garrison said, black is white, white is black. And it was stunning for me, really. I actually had a sleepless night thinking about what happened to JFK, what could happen to any of us that happened to JFK. And for that point on, I just made it my passion to try to find out as much as I could. I've read hundreds of books. I've attended probably 25 national conferences over the years, probably the first one in 1992 in Chicago, and I've gone from there. I go to Dallas every year. My dean of students here knew I've given talks over the years on different college campuses and with groups and libraries and such about the JFK assassination. In 2001, I believe, my dean of students offered me an opportunity to actually create a class about it, very open-minded about it. He called it the Political Assassinations of the 1960s, and I just made up my mind. I'd teach it 1 year at a time and see what happens. And here it is 18 years later. I still teach the class. I still get enough people interested every year. I can promote it a little bit with my history classes. Mostly, you would be surprised how fascinating that younger group of Americans, if they're actually confronted with this information, are intrigued by it. I mean, they have to be. I think they have to be introduced to it. But still, nonetheless, it's there. It's important. It's our history. I included a quote in my last article from Julius Caesar, and I love the quote, and I tell it to my history students: to not to know what happened before you're born is to remain a child forever. I think that's a great quote. That we need to know our history, even if it was something before we were born or before our generation, and I try to impress that to them. And I love teaching. I'm passionate about history, not just these events, but especially these events, and meaning events, and obviously the assassinations in the 1960s of JFK, RFK, and MLK, and what they mean, and the implications for our society, and how our countries have been changed by those things, I think are enormously important, and I think that's why I and you and others like us continue to focus on it.
Right, and focus we do. And mandatory in that, I think, is having quite a voluminous library. And you've said that you've read hundreds of books on the case. So if you have a student, and I'm sure that you do, if you have a student come to you with a starting interest, and they're engaged and they want to know more, but they don't know where to begin, what books do you suggest to that student?
That's a tough question. I mean, I could maybe not so much as one book. I mean, with the JFK assassination, it's almost like a black hole you end up falling into. You read a book and you really feel like, that gives me the answers I'm looking for. And then you read another. And I think you have to, with this story, without just saying any one book has the whole story. And I know what you're talking kind of like a primer, and I'll get to my answer there in a minute, but I want to make a point that I don't know if anybody in this story has it 100% right. I don't know if I have 100% understanding of what happened in Dallas. I think people that think they have those answers are naive. I think we have to listen to a lot of different people. The fact that there was no complete or real investigation that brought justice to this case means we've always been left to speculate, and some speculations are closer than others. But I can mention books. I think a lot of people think that the James Douglas's book on JFK, The Unspeakable, is one of the great books in terms of maybe putting into perspective, what really, what this really means. And I think maybe what the JFK assassination means is important as, maybe what happened. I think that's a book I would definitely recommend. I mean, one of the first books I read that exposed me to a lot of information was High Treason by Harrison Livingston. I think that was a great book early on. I mean, from my personal experience, that exposed it. Or Jim Mars's book, that laid out the basic information of the case. And I just think all of us need to keep our eyes open and keep listening, eyes and ears, and what maybe there's definitely still is things that are out there that we don't know yet about this story that we still need to investigate.
Well, that's correct. And one of the ways that we do still investigate is to gather with the other researchers. And it's really a chance a couple times a year to also share information, to share what we've been doing. And it's not necessarily what I would call a social event, although I'm sure that some would, but it is a chance to really talk about the case and to brainstorm some other way other than email or telephone or something. So now you've been planning a few conferences yourself, and you have planned a few over the years, mainly with the JFK Historical Group. And this April, there will be a conference that will actually take place on your home turf, Olney Central College. But before we get to the details of what's going to happen in Olney, what is the JFK Historical Group? What was its origin, and who are involved?
Well, first of all, it's all, a few of us actually have a little bit of a laugh about this because, we've used this term JFK Historical Group, and I don't want to go around and pretend like we're some highly sophisticated organization involved in a myriad of things when we're not. Basically, we began doing some conferences in 2000. Meaning basically Ed Tatro and I. Ed's one of the preeminent, if not the most knowledgeable, researchers in the country in this story since the very beginning, 50 plus years. A fantastic, knowledgeable guy. Everybody loves to hear him talk in various speeches. We've grown close over the years. We communicate all the time. And he's helped me a lot. We've kind of gotten together and decided to do some of our own conferences 5 or 6 years ago. We talked about, the fact that maybe some things about the conference we've been to maybe fall short of how we think they might be ran. And so we've kind of got involved in doing our own things. And there's another guy that I have to mention that most people aren't aware of, but his name is Walt Boys, and his father, William Boys, in Washington, D.C. They've been close friends of mine. For 20 plus years too, involved in conferences, They've helped me on logistics when we've had our conferences out in Washington, D.C. They always come here to Olney. So it started in 2013. We had a conference here on my campus, a much smaller affair, but we thought a very significant one, and we thought it was very well ran. And then the 50th anniversary of the Warren Commission in 2014, we had one in Washington, D.C. And then we actually had one again in March in Washington, D.C. this past year, and now we're coming back to Olney again. So this will be our fourth conference, and we felt like they've all been successful so far. We try to get a good variety of people with different viewpoints. We don't, we're not in the business of trying to tell folks, one story or rejecting another. We want to look at this from a historical perspective and get as many viewpoints as possible, and we usually do at our conferences. We try to give adequate amount of time to our speakers. I think in some cases, conferences tend to invite so many folks, and there's a bunch of experts out there, and there's always more people that would like to come and talk than what time you have to give them. But we don't overbook speakers to the point where everybody's doing 30, 40 minutes and nobody has enough time to give an adequate presentation. We feel like logistically we do things in a well-organized fashion. We've been complimented for that, and then obviously, especially with here on our campus at Olney Central College here in Illinois, we're going to be doing it in an academic setting, trying to project that a little bit. We have 3 or 4 history professors that are actually on our list of speakers. Obviously, college students will be here, and they're interested. We'll have some of them that will want to attend and see what's going on. So we feel like we're a little bit a different approach than maybe some of the other. I'm not diminishing what some great conferences in Dallas every year. Obviously, we always attend, and I speak at those conferences. But we kind of presented a little bit of a different image, like you and I talked about over and over again. We're not going to be Dallas 2.0 here. We're going to project something a little different, and we feel like we have some new speakers, some groundbreaking people, groundbreaking information that will be brought forth this April in this conference specifically.
Let's get right into it. And why don't we begin with the general information? When is it? How do attendees get there? How much is it? All the logistical details.
Okay, let's start with the times and how we're organizing. And we just did put up a new first schedule. That's a tentative schedule, because if you do these conferences, you realize the schedules are going to change. Things are going to happen. You might pick up a speaker. You might have a speaker drop out, and some things might happen along the way. But we did put out our first schedule just a day or so ago on Facebook. I encourage people to check out on my Facebook website, David Denton JFK, or on many of the JFK Assassination Facebook groups that we posted that information about our conference and our schedule. But in general, we're going to start on Thursday evening, kind of have a early bird meeting Thursday evening where people could do an early registration. We're also going to show the film The Searchers by Randy Fenson's excellent film on JFK researchers. We're going to show that at our theater at our college on Thursday evening. And we'll have some opportunities to meet the speakers, and also hopefully some opportunities for press people to talk with their speakers the night before. And then the actual conference opens on Friday morning at 9 o'clock on our theater on campus. We're running Friday evening all the way from about 9 in the morning to 8:45 in the evening. On Saturday, about the same thing. We'll start maybe even a little bit earlier. In fact, ST, we've got you opening at 8:20 now, right? Or 8:15.
Absolutely.
Change that around.
8:15.
So we're gonna start you bright and early on Saturday morning with, of course, and then follow up with some of the CDPR members, of speakers and members that we're all part of, and we'll be working through to about 5:30 on Saturday, and then we'll step out for a little bit, and then have our banquet at a hotel, nice hotel in town, about 6:15 in the evening, and then have our 2 keynote speakers right now. And we plan on it being Lisa Peace, an outstanding researcher who just came out with her new book, A Lie Too Big to Fail, I believe is the name, on the RFK assassination. I'm digging through it right now, and it's a great read, I can tell you that. And then also Ed Tatro, who's, again, an outstanding speaker. People just, someone posted on the internet yesterday on Facebook the other day, and they're planning on driving the 8 hours just to come to see Ed Tatro speak. He is that kind of speaker and tremendously knowledgeable about the JFK assassination. So the 2 keynote speakers, and that night's going to be fantastic for our banquet that evening on Saturday. And then on Sunday, we'll start again on Sunday morning, go about a half a day with some more speakers, and then have one more little meeting and luncheon with our speakers and our guests. And the official closing of our conference will be at 2 o'clock on Sunday. But we did add another event for the next evening for those who might want to stick around, and also for the people in the community, because we're focusing on a couple things. We're trying to attract people from around the country, but there's a lot of interested folks here in the area, in our community as well. And John Barber, the excellent film producer, longtime person involved with video communications, did the Real People show a long time ago, right? He's done a couple great videos. John's going to be introducing his new book at our conference and giving a speech about that, and also about the Garrison files that he's uncovered. But he's also going to show his film, The American Media and the Second Assassination of John F. Kennedy, on Monday evening here on our campus, for those who would like to come or stick around for that. So we got a lot of things going over basically about a 5-day period, and I think people really have to be excited to try to make every effort to be here. I mean, as far as transportation, we are in a remote location. You and I both know that. We're both Southern Illinois small town guys, right? So 2 hours from it, yeah. And so, but we're kind of centrally located in the Midwest. One of the great things I think about it, and of course we're located in southeastern central area of Illinois, is that, we're within driving distance of several major cities. If you can get in a car and 4 or 5 hour drive, you're here from a lot of different places, or even lesser than that. We are 2 hours from St. Louis. We're 2 hours from Indianapolis. We're about 4 hours from Memphis, 3.5 from Nashville, 5, 6 from Cincinnati. I mean, in 4 hours from Chicago. You can see we're in a position where a lot of folks could get here by car if they're farther and they need to fly. Airports. We're flying our speakers into St. Louis, which is an airport's about 2:20 from our campus. We're going to shuttle people in from there, but also Indianapolis. Evansville, Indiana airport is only, I believe, 75 minutes away. And it would be, for those, you would probably have to get a rental car and come in if you're going to fly. But we're also trying to shuttle some people from St. Louis and our speakers. That might be a possibility as well. But we'll do everything we can to help folks to understand where we're at. I mean, we're posting information on hotels and transportation on our website. We're going to put more on that on Facebook tomorrow. And this is the kind of the people and the speakers that are going to be at this conference, and some of the things that are going to be coming out. I just don't think any person that's involved and serious about the JFK assassination or the RFK or MLK assassination is going to want to miss this. I mean, it's going to be a great event. I would encourage everybody to make every effort to be here, even if there's a little bit of obstacles on travel. The costs for the conference are going to be probably more reasonable than other conferences, just simply because we're not located in a bigger city. The hotel costs are way less. I mean, the hotels that we have in mind are, you can check on our website, are probably going to be in around $60 a night. I know that's unheard of for, if we were in Dallas or someplace like that. Our registration fee is $80, which is, again, extremely reasonable. Our banquet for keynote speakers is going to be another $40, and we're having prime rib that night, and that's the meal. I can tell you, it's pretty good. So we've got everything planned out. It should be a fantastic week, and I just hope everyone has a chance, can come and join us.
So for everyone out there who may be interested, it's Friday, April 5th through Sunday, April 7th. But as David said, we're going to show the Benson documentary on Thursday night, and we'll see the John Barber film on Monday night. And you definitely want to see those if you possibly can. Now, David, one of the things that I like most about how you've worked this schedule is that you'll often hear conference attendees say, they paid all this money and then they didn't really have an opportunity to ask questions to the featured speakers. But in Olney, looking at the schedule right now, we'll have 3 opportunities to either hear or ask questions to both Lisa Peace and Ed Tatro, and I think that's excellent.
Right. We specifically, on banquet night, you're pressed for time, and you don't want to go all night. I mean, we're giving Lisa and Ed both 1 hour to speak, but that'll, I'm sure they'll chew that time up in a hurry. They'll have a lot to say, and maybe some folks may not get a chance to ask questions, but we're going to have a kind of a little social and get together afterwards, so people can maybe one-on-one with them and other speakers. But the next morning, I specifically assigned some time for both Lisa and Ed to have a follow-up where people can ask questions. They can kind of talk whatever they want, almost like a bull session type thing, so people can get a chance to follow through with some questions. Basically, all our speakers in our regular lineup are going to be given a 50-minute segment for the most part, and then hopefully that about maybe another 5 minutes for questions for each speaker. But we have that's one of the difficulties with the almost like a catch-22 situation in these conferences, and I've seen it happen so often. In fact, that's one of the things we talked about when we started to organize ourselves, is that you want to give people opportunity to ask questions, but that can quickly erode into endless arguments and time spent, and you lose time, and you fall behind on your schedule. A lot of bad things can happen. So we try to give a limited amount of time for questions without letting 1 or 2 people come up, take over, and devolve into some major arguments. We do our best to avoid those things, because this is a very heated topic, and people have very sometimes polarized opinions about it, and that can lead to some confrontations. But at the same time, we want to give all of our speakers an opportunity to speak out and give what they believe is important information from their end of it, and they'll get that opportunity.
I also know that another speaker that folks are really looking forward to seeing and questioning, actually, is Christopher Fulton, the author of The Inheritance. Now, that book was probably, this is just my guess, I think it was probably Trying Day's bestseller in Dallas, and it's been creating quite the buzz. Now, Phil Nelson just wrote a lengthy positive review of it. You and I both like Phil very much, and he did a good job on that. But The Inheritance has almost been a phenomenon. Now, you told me about it even before it was released, I believe, and you were right. There's been a lot of discussion. So tell us a little bit about The Inheritance and about Christopher Fulton, who will be speaking at the Olney Conference.
Okay, well, I've actually had probably 2 45-minute conversations with Chris Fulton, who wrote the book, The Inheritance. I have obviously had some communication with Chris Milligan, who's the publisher from Trying Day, who's told me a lot about the book, his publisher. And Ed Tatro is also, who's a very skeptical guy himself about things, has been able to have several conversations with Chris as well. It's an incredible story. I mean, some people say, is this too good to be true? I don't think so. I really don't. I think, Chris Fulton is an individual who was just your average American who somehow knew someone, who somehow came upon some very important evidence in the JFK assassination and passed that information and evidence along to Fulton. And Chris ran in when he got, and I'll speak to what that evidence is in a moment. I don't know if we have time to tell the whole story, but that evidence, once the United States government in the late 1990s found out that Chris Fulton had this evidence, they came down on him hard, and they took every effort to gain it, prosecute him, put him in jail, destroy his life. And it's a disturbing story. And basically, what Chris came in possession through an intermediary was key evidence that Evelyn Lincoln, JFK's secretary, had received in turn from RFK, according to Chris's story, that RFK knew a whole lot more about what happened in Dallas, and I think a lot of us have suspected that for a long time, and had key evidence, including a watch that JFK wore when he was shot in Dallas that may have had mercury on it, a sign of types of bullets that might have been used, and other documents. And Chris Fulton, in his travels, once he gained possession, actually came in contact with JFK Jr. and had discussions about his evidence. And JFK Jr., he says, told him to hang on, that he was going to expose things, but he never got that opportunity, obviously, when he died in a plane crash. And he also had discussions about the evidence. The man who probably held that evidence, a Secret Service agent named Robert Bach, who told Fulton some incredible stories about his versions of what happened in Dallas. And so, a lot of people feel like the story fills in some gaps. Other people, we can't. These are things that can't be verified. All I can tell you is this about, my conversations with Chris is that I don't, number one, he's not a person that's been obviously involved with the JFK assassination community for years and years and years. In fact, I saw somebody make a comment on Facebook about where his thinking about what RFK might have known or might have been connected to events with Cuba pre-assassination, thought it sounded like Lamar Waldron's book. And maybe other people feel like maybe Chris has borrowed some of his stories from other researchers. I can tell you this from talking to Chris a couple times. I don't think Chris Fulton knows the difference between Lamar Waldron and Lamar Hunt. Okay? Or he's just not the kind of person. He was not connected long term to this story. He will tell you what he knows, and he knows what he knows. He's very intelligent. He's very measured in what he says. He's one of those guys. I think he's an individual who says, if you don't want to believe him, don't believe him. But this is my story. And now, does that verify his story? No, it doesn't. There's going to be some stuff there, and there was an option there, I think, that might also leave it open to criticism of the book, is that, that the story is factually based, but they chose to fill in gaps in the story with some speculation about conversations that may or may not have had. And for those that are pursuing some sort of cold, documented detail verifying everything in Chris Fulton's book, they're not going to find it. Yet, he does have a wealth of documents in the back of his book that verify many of the things, or at least give credence to many of the things he brings out in his book. And so, I don't think to this knowledge that Chris has made any public appearances yet. It may well be the first one he gets a chance to speak to us in April. So we're looking forward to it. And you get a chance to answer some of the questions that some people might have. It's a very complicated but fascinating story coming out of the book called The Inheritance. And I would recommend people read it. The people just need to pick it up and read it themselves and draw their own conclusions, because in some ways it validates some things that some of us have long believed about what happened in Dallas, but I'll leave that for folks to read.
Well, right now, Christopher Fulton is scheduled to speak at, let me look here, at 4:05 Central Time on Friday afternoon. So if you're even in the area and would like to see that, jfkhistorical.com. Now, your presentation in Dallas, David, it concerned the 2017 and 2018 JFK document releases, and we all remember those. And I thought it was one of the better speeches of the conference, to be honest. I really did. And, the corporate media announced on the day of their release that there was nothing there. Nothing to see here, folks. Move on. But now that we've had time to really peruse these documents as a community, what do you think were some of the most notable findings?
Well, I appreciate the good comments, and to be honest with you, we did some document research here. I had an excellent assistant here working for me and was involved in some military history, and man, we did some work on the documents ourselves. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we were able to uncover vast troves of evidence or information that hadn't been seen before. But I think that there's some researchers that did a good job of, I think obviously there was some disappointment associated with that event in October of 2017, right? A year and a half ago. And, that date was October 26th. There was a tremendous amount of expectation. The media was unusually, with the Kennedy assassination, actually focused on it a great deal. But I think, I looked at it back in perspective, like you almost had two groups of folks there that are folks that not you or I, or where we put ourselves in categories. You had a lot of folks in the media that generally have always been, let's say, skeptical about the JFK assassination. I think they were looking for some answers that might once and for all, close the door on this whole story. They didn't get that. But then you had a lot of people, I just remember how many folks came up to me, talked to me, and, that generally interested in the JFK story, but not really the JFK assassination story, but maybe not to the degree on a day-to-day basis or intense as you or I or folks that come to our conferences are, that, hey, maybe we finally get to know the truth, what happened in Dallas. I don't think either one of those groups got the answer they were looking for. And that might be in part because maybe some of the stuff is still, that obviously, I mean, the story was that President Trump was almost up to a few days before was adamant about, well, we're going to release everything. And then, as we know, a lot of the folks from the national security apparatus got to him and convinced him that there still should be some slowdown on this process or limit their stuff. And the comments that were made, I think that Trump made about how it would be, how it was going to endanger national security. I mean, and I'm not blaming that one on Trump. I'm sure that's what he was repeating, what he was told. But it's almost beyond the pale to think that something from 55 years ago could endanger the national security of the United States. Embarrass, maybe, but endanger? I can't see that. But yet, so we didn't get to see everything we wanted to see, but we still got to see some things. I think, though there was nothing to the point of being revelatory, but if you put the pieces together of some of the things that have came out during this last year and a half, along with some of the things from the past 30, 40 years, if you piece those things together, if you look at those things in total, I mean, I don't see how one can't come to this conclusion that, we've been sold a bill of goods, that something darker and deeper happened in Dallas, and we've got a pretty good idea who was involved and the people who had the motivation to be involved. And if we take a close look in terms of some of the things, but some of the things that caught my eye that were done, that we've looked at, or some of the really good researchers, some of which are at our conference. For instance, Larry Rivera, who's going to be speaking about, tremendous guy on the documents, and he came up with some important things, passed them along to me, that I thought were very significant. Others have done as well. But some things that come to mind for me, a document involved with one Ray Rocca, who's a key member of the CIA, and Rocca is being interviewed by Warren Commission counsel David Bellin. And of course, we know Bellin wasn't a guy necessarily interested in the truth, but this document was released, shows that Rocca, almost not knowing what was going on with Helms and the other side of the CIA. Rocca was an Angleton man, and he basically, I think, not knowing what Helms had told the Warren Commission, kind of spilled the beans, so to speak, on some things in his conversations with Bellin, particularly in respect to Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, he actually made statements that Oswald went to Mexico City, was involved in intelligence operations. He didn't say the CIA was involved, but that he was involved in intelligence operations in Mexico City, specifically in terms of a potential Castro assassination plot, and that he was using a cover story and involved with it. So here you've got a CIA agent going into the Warren Commission at a time where publicly we're being told that Oswald was nothing more than a lone nut, and suggesting that, look, this guy was intelligence. He was involved with a plot against Castro. He was using a cover story. And it's right there in the documents. I mean, you can read, if one wants to look at it. I think that's very significant. A document about an former FBI agent named Oris Pena, an informant, as I said, an informant to the FBI that people have known about for a long time. Some new stuff was released that, and I think this is something specifically Larry Rivera came up with and sent along the way. Basically, Pena would testify to the House Select Committee that Warren DeBreeze, an FBI agent, that he was informing in New Orleans. I think basically described Pena as a bar owner who was an informant to the FBI in New Orleans. Said he saw a lot of things going on, and he went on record as saying that FBI agents and Lee Harvey Oswald were basically congregating in the same places, that DeBreeze was running Oswald, that DeBreeze followed Oswald to Dallas, that he believed DeBreeze was involved with the assassination in some ways, and that DeBreeze threatened to get rid of his ass if he talked. In fact, that's a quote in the document, that we're going to get rid of your ass if you don't keep quiet. That's a pretty amazing document, I think, if somebody wanted to look at it. I think that's important. Another FBI document, and I am not certain as to whether they were in the classified documents or not, or it was something that longtime researcher Gary Shaw came up with and spoke about a couple of years ago in Dallas. Brian Edwards, one of our speakers, a great researcher, has also spoken about this story about a James, I think it's James Whitey Estes in 1978, walked into an FBI office and gave a 13-page deposition shortly before his death. And he claimed to have worked in Jack Ruby's Carousel Club. And that while he worked there, he saw Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, and at one point he saw those two individuals meeting with one John Conley, the governor of Texas, over something in that club before the assassination. And of course, we know John Conley was Lyndon Johnson's one of his closest confidants. That's a pretty amazing statement that this man went in and made the point to give a 13-page deposition over before his death. Take that for what it's worth. I think that's important. I think other things that come out, from my standpoint, some other couple of things I think are significant in terms of that came out of documents are 201 files, where maybe it's not what was said in the document, but by the very fact that somebody had a 201 file. Obviously, that's an indication that they were a paid member of the CIA. They were on the payroll of the Central Intelligence Agency. One of those individuals was the mayor of Dallas, Earl Campbell, which, that made some public interest there, and it was on some internet sites, and people had to see that. But to me, I find that extremely important because I look for, and I my personal opinion about what happened in Dallas, that it was a nexus, a convergence of powerful forces. That yes, the intelligence community, members of the intelligence community were involved in this, and the mob, but I cannot leave out the fact that the on the ground in Texas, there were elements involved in this too, and folks that wanted Lyndon Johnson to be president of the United States, and folks who controlled that scene. And so when you see about a couple of folks I'm going to talk about, and one of those is Earl Campbell. Well, Earl Campbell was a true Texas insider, obviously the mayor of Dallas, but obviously what we know that he also was the brother of Charles Campbell, obviously one of the top individuals in the CIA that JFK fired after the Bay of Pigs. So maybe that's how significant that he was actually on the payroll. And I've debated that with some folks. Well, that's obvious that there was a connection there because his brother. We already know his brother was the CIA. But to me, the very fact that Earl Campbell was being paid for something in 1963, the man who Jim Garrison contemplated prosecuting because of changes in parade route in the 1960s in his investigation, was on the payroll of the CIA. And also one of these individuals that had so many deep connections in the Dallas community. There's that. And then another 201 file I think is very significant, that of Gordon McClendon. And again, here's another fellow I think is important because if folks know the background on Gordon McClendon, he kind of is one of those guys that crosses over into these different environments of that nexus thing I was talking about, because we know for a long time that Gordon McClendon was a guy who was involved with David Atlee Phillips, CIA, and the retired agents of the CIA, and ran that operation years after the assassination, and he had connections there. But Gordon McClendon was also a true Texas insider who knew and obviously connected and apparently knew Jack Ruby. And so you start to put these things together. Now, so what am I saying? Well, one of the things, the documents that came out was that, in fact, Gordon McClendon had a 201 file. Now, what does that mean? Again, it means that the CIA had their hands on it in some form, that he was on the payroll. Now, what that exact purpose was, we don't know, but the very fact that the 201 file exists on a private citizen like Gordon McClendon, who, by the way, I mentioned Ed Tatro. Ed Tatro has a couple of sources who say that the day of the assassination, Gordon McClendon blurted out something in his business that morning. I'm going to go basically, I paraphrase, go see the president get shot. And connect that to the fact that he knew Jack Ruby, okay? We know that another document that came out that said Jack Ruby almost said the same thing. Ruby, this made national news, that Ruby said, I'm going to told an FBI informant I'm going to go downtown and watch the fireworks. It's interesting that Jack Ruby and his associate, Gordon McClendon, said basically that maybe said the same thing that morning, and that McClendon was a man who was obviously connected to the CIA as well as elements in Texas. So those are the kind of things that I think maybe not any one of those things that I just mentioned there or came through with is, as I said, a major revelation. But they're all things that kind of piece together in this whole story and give us an idea of what was going on that day in Dallas, I think.
Well, you always hear that question about the smoking gun. Did the documents contain it? The media asked. And then, of course, they quickly answer themselves to the negative. But I always try to explain to those sort of curious, uninvolved, casual questioners that we aren't trying to find a smoking gun per se, because there's nothing that we found over 50 plus years that hinges upon something else being discovered. The case against Lee Harvey Oswald has been disproven. That's solved. It wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone, and in fact, it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald acting at all. We've already found that evidence. That's done. But that now needs to become the norm that's taught in schools, the norm that's reported on the news every November 22nd. And much of the struggle is normalizing what's already been discovered. And for those that do need that official validation for whatever reason that may be, the House Select Committee on Assassinations said that there was probably a conspiracy. And that's the U.S. House of Representatives. So again, that's done. So what are we trying to find? Well, we're still trying to find those sort of strands of information that link one part of the story to other disparate parts. And we're trying to clarify more of the singular aspects so that the picture we can draw is more complete. It contains more colors. We're trying to, in essence, take the black and white stencil that we were given by the first generation of searchers and make it technicolor. Then we're trying to make that the norm.
I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. I mean, that just jives exactly with my thinking about this whole story. In fact, one of the statements I made in Dallas is that, when we talk about the JFK assassination, it's not unsolved; it's unresolved. There's a key difference. I mean, the fact that we know we have a good idea that, number one, we have a level of certainty here that Oswald wasn't involved, and we have a real good idea of who some of the particulars were that, in all probability, were involved. Where we're lacking is that, as you say, some of those connecting links that we're still trying to find and pursue, and we have some difference of opinions about, depending on who you talk to in the JFK research. We have a lot of different opinions. Again, that whole thing about not having anything 100% right, I understand. But the real problem is lack of institutional validation. That's one of the things I try to dig into. And the reality is 55 plus years, 56 years later, we are not going to gain justice in the JFK assassination in terms of bringing people to trial or prosecuting the perpetrators who might still be alive or anything like that. But the institutional validation is still a possibility. If we can get at least some level of recognition from people in high positions in the media. I understand they're skeptical in this world today where conspiracy has become a dirty word that they don't want to be associated with. They might feel like it might ruin their careers to be associated with. They tend to scoff at anything associated with conspiracy. But I think we need to remember something. The definition of conspiracy, I mean, I don't have my Webster's out here, but we can paraphrase that. It's just basically a combination of elements or individuals involved in some criminal enterprise. There's nothing crazy, insane, or impossible about that. Those things happen every day. But the problem, I know lies that, they're promoters of conspiracy for their own benefit. I'm not a big Alex Jones fan. I'll be honest with that, because I think he promotes a lot of garbage. There might be something you can sift through in the truth, but there's a lot of garbage out there. I think people like that try to take advantage of the situation for their own benefit, but in the process, everybody gets lumped into that, or any situation like the JFK assassination. There are facts of conspiracy. It's not some fantasy. They're the overwhelming facts of conspiracy that are out there that need to be validated, if not by the media, on a historical level. Academics like myself, or in our history books, and what our students read at some point, someday, I hope that it's going to be something besides a guy named Lee Oswald acting alone shot the president. I think there's still an opportunity to get some traction in those areas. And that's one of the things we're having this conference on our campus for. We always try. We talk about changing the historical reality of what happened in Dallas. And that can still be done. That is still possible. In fact, there have been many times over history where people have ultimately come to different conclusions about what they originally had. I mean, we've corrected our history in other situations. I talk about this all the time, the fact that in relation to this, one success has been that I think the media and historians have both really come a long way in the right direction about the whole story with JFK in Vietnam over the last 20, 30 years, that there's just too many documents, too many things that show and demonstrate that JFK would have not, done this massive escalation in the Vietnam War and intentions, in fact, leaving Vietnam, that this was a Johnson escalation. And I think there's a lot of people in the media and in historical circles are coming to grips with that. Whereas 30, 40 years ago, it was more of a credo that, that JFK just put 16,000 people in there and would have continued on the same path if he not died as Johnson would have. That is just not true. And we have, I think, in part because of the Assassination Review Board was created in the 90s, released a lot of documents that told us as such, and that helped. So I think there's always a possibility that this can still get done, that this story can get changed.
Well, yes, and as I said, one way that we have to do this is that we need to normalize it within high school and college history courses. And you, in fact, are doing that at Olney Central College by teaching a course on this. Now, I have to believe that this has to be a popular course at the college. I just think students would be really interested in this. But take us through the course and the outline, if you would.
Well, basically what I try to do, and in fact, I purposely named the conference Political Assassinations of the 1960s and this spring because that's the name of my class that I teach every year. And we focus on primarily the JFK assassination, but we also spend some time, as we should, talking about the assassination of Martin Luther King and RFK. And obviously, I think we maybe failed to mention this point, but I think it's the things that are happening with the RFK assassination right now, with the fact that, RFK Jr. went on national TV, like, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago on the Alec Baldwin show, and basically point blank said that Sirhan should be paroled, that there were others involved, that he felt there was a conspiracy. Now, again, I see a parallel to that, and I'm off the track here, but I do want to make this point, is why hasn't that, why did we not even see a blip on the radar screen after he did that? Under normal circumstances, on a normal story, that should have exploded in the media, that a Kennedy family member wants his father's death and investigation reopened. Why is that on the front page of the New York Times? Now, the Washington Post covered that a little bit last year, and God bless them. They did when RFK made some statements about that previous, or 5 years ago when RFK Jr. made a point to go down to Dallas, Texas, in an interview down there and say that my father believed that JFK was killed by a conspiracy involving intelligence in the CIA. Or 20 years ago when the King family won a civil suit against Lloyd Jowers that there was a conspiracy against the murder of MLK. Yet, again, a media that just will not touch those things. It's disturbing, and I saw that parallel pattern. But those are some of the things we talk about, those 3 assassinations. And I try to, there's just so much to the JFK assassination story. You could spend a year on that alone. I mean, the wealth and breadth and depth of information, and it's very confusing to some. I mean, but I just try to break it down. I start off by talking about the same day evidence, what I call the same day evidence, and I always tell my students, I'm going to go through these things, stuff like the photographic evidence, the Zapruder film, the magic bullet theory, basic stuff, and I tell them, I say, look, I'm going to spend about 20 minutes here, and if there's any possibility that you still believe that there was a lone nut that may have killed the president, Oswald acting alone, then you're not listening. I don't see how you can ignore what I'm saying here. And I've never had any students yet that left the course, at least publicly, telling me that they believe that Oswald was a lone nut. I mean, it doesn't take long to present that evidence to an open-minded audience, and they not see that. So we start with that, and there's so many eye-opening things to focus on, like the JFK autopsy. We kind of go from there on that, and that's amazing stuff to look at. We dig into the mystery of Lee Harvey Oswald in every element of him and his background, and try to focus on that. And then we zero in on his activities in New Orleans, and that kind of segues into the CIA and intelligence involvement, potential of that in the assassination. We look at some of the rather amazing Secret Service behavior surrounding the time of the assassination that you and I both are aware of. And then we kind of move from there to, potential mob involvement, and then kind of close down by looking at Texas itself and the connections to potentially the assassination in Texas where it happened. And we try to put it all together, and I asked that question, so who killed Kennedy? It's kind of, I spent my last set is, so who killed Kennedy? That's the question everybody asks you and I every week, right?
Yeah, right, every week.
The question, in fact, my last article was, I just put at the top, so who killed Kennedy? Maybe some people got the wrong impression by my article. It was actually an article about all the different things that came out. But the point I made about that was I used that title because that's the question you, I, and others that have been involved with this for so long are always asked. People want to know. My students want to know. But, that's not an answer maybe you can just take 5 seconds to do, right? It might take a little longer. but we try to come to some closure about that and the different theories. And then we move into, try to give as much information as possible about what happened and the parallels between what happened in Dallas and what happened to Martin Luther King and RFK, unfortunately, too, and the tragedy of all that, and try to put it all together. That's basically what I try to accomplish in a semester. And I think the kids love the class enough to where, there's enough students every semester that pass the word on to somebody else, and they tell them, hey, take this class, and then I'll have it for another semester. So far, it's worked so far. I'm still having it.
Do you have any required reading for the course?
Well, I basically just kind of made my own unofficial book of articles and documents that thrown together over the years that I think are relevant. In fact, I've got about 200 pages of more than that of articles and documents that I basically throw into we actually print it. I have my bookstore throw it together in like a book form. I hope the copyright people don't come after me. I could get sued over about 10 times if they found out I just throw some things together that I think are significant. There's that comes with the course. And yeah, I recommend. There's a lot of books I recommend they look at. I don't necessarily assign books per se in total, but I make a lot of recommendations. We cross over a lot of different books when we talk about their articles that I always require that they read the 30-page article written by Lisa Peace about Jim Angleton, for instance. That's one that comes to mind that I always ask them to read. And they get a good variety of different things, I believe. I feel pretty good about that.
For those 18 and 19-year-olds who are hearing about this for the first time, what parts of the story really engaged them most?
Well, let me point out, I mean, we're a community college, so over the years, I've actually had a lot of people from the community, adults come in from the community and take the class too. In fact, I don't know. I think I'm almost exhausted that. I mean, I think everybody in town that's been in, and there's quite a few in my hometown of Olney, it's been interested in this case, and sometime or another has came in and taken that course. So we do have some adults, but like you say, a lot of 18 or 19-year-olds. Well, I would say the eye-opening things, you know, that come out that can't be ignored. First of all, again, you know, like for instance, you live in Southern Illinois like I do. You know, this is, I don't know, with West Frankfort down there is big deer hunting country, but man, Olney is. We've got a lot of deer hunters. Students are deer hunters. And I actually borrowed this from my son, who's also a history teacher and also talks. He likes to discuss the Kennedy assassination a lot himself in his class. In fact, he's a techie guy like most millennials, and he's the guy that always does my PowerPoints and such. But he came up with a point with his class years ago. Now I already use it that, you know, the magic bullet, for instance, like, you know, or single bullet. When you explain to the students that this bullet supposedly created 7 wounds and passed through 2 bones, dense bones, in both Governor Connally and the president, and came out looking like that in almost a perfect fashion with virtually nothing missing, and show a picture of that and ask deer hunters, have you ever seen a bullet that looked like that after you shot a deer? And they go, there's no way. I mean, right there, right? I mean, that's a deal breaker for them right there. They say, look, man, this doesn't add up. This is impossible, because it's something they can directly relate to that it just couldn't have happened that way, no matter how it's been sold to the American public. And I think, you know, when you show them dramatic video that you know, of autopsy pictures where everyone who's seen the picture, all the pictures of the people describing a large hole in the back of Ken's head is the autopsy. Yet, you know, the official autopsy photograph has JFK's head intact. You know, again, that seems to be an impossibility. There's something wrong here. Or Secret Service agents being ordered, or a Secret Service agent being ordered off a car just at the start of the parade. Those are things that jump out at students when they go, man, this just doesn't add up. I mean, and then they want to get into the, you know, once those things, again, eliminate that idea that one person acted alone, then they want to, you know, they want to seek out answers. They may not have as much in-depth information as you or I about, you know, who could have been involved in this. And it's a tragic murder mystery, and it's one that a lot of people, whether you're 18 or 78, can get engaged in pretty quick.
I believe so as well. I do. So let's go over the Olney schedule one more time, the conference schedule, jfkhistorical.com. But if anyone out there wants to know more information, wants the schedule and all of that, let's go over the particulars one last time for the night so that everyone can have the information.
Well, if you go to, this is pretty easy, jfkhistorical.com, or if you just Google JFK Historical Group, the link to the conference website will come up. Again, that's JFK Historical Group or jfkhistorical.com. And we're going to keep adding information as we go on it. but all the basic information, hotel, speaker schedule, air travel information, dates, all that stuff is there on our website. And then again, we're going to be posting constant updates on that, but we're also going on Facebook, which is obviously a great way to, connected with a lot of JFK research people and people interested in JFK story around the country. We'll be posting stuff almost like every other day about speakers, about updates, about information. And, again, if you want to find me on Facebook, David Denton JFK, you just put in David Denton JFK, you'll find me. And we also have a website on Facebook, JFK Historical Group, that's there as well. And so I would say just take a look at those things. And again, it's a great conference with some of the best researchers in the country, some people that folks haven't heard before, some new authors. As I said, we have 3 or 4 history professors that are going to be here. They're going to be delivering speeches. It's going to have an academic tone to it as well. Shane O'Sullivan, a great RFK researcher. He will not be able to be here in person since I believe he's from Ireland, right? Someone asked me. He's
right.
Ireland,
yes.
Correct?
Yeah. Yes.
But I just communicated with him today. He's going to be presenting via Skype from across the pond about his views about the RFK assassination. Plenty of great researchers, Casey Quinlan and Brian Edwards and David Knight. I have a kind of a trilogy going to be going on right at the beginning of the conference. Those guys are all excellent researchers that have done some eye-opening stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing the stuff they're going to do. They're kind of keeping me a little bit of mystery, but they've done terrific presentations before at my conference. I'm looking forward to seeing them. Chris Milligan's going to be here. The Trine Day publisher who's done some work. He's going to give a presentation. He's got his authors. One of those new professors is writing about the American media and the JFK assassination named Mal Hyman is going to be making his first appearance. Damon Ice, who's done some great work. I think you were familiar with him on what happened with JFK Jr. He's going to be here. I mentioned John Barber, Larry Rivera, Jeff Worcester, our guy in CDPR, our good friend Richard Bartholomew. He just came out with a great book. He'll be here speaking. There's others too as well. Phil Nelson has done some great work on the MLK assassination. And I didn't get a chance to mention everyone, but we have got right now, I believe, 19 speakers, and that number may change, but it's going to be a great weekend. I mean, I hope everybody takes an opportunity to make it.
And I hope they will as well. It's going to be a great conference. And if anyone out there is in the car or you're on a train or you're on an airplane and you're hearing us now, you can also email us at midnightridernews@gmail.com and we'll send you all the information. And I want to thank you so much for being on the show tonight, David. Thank you very much, my friend.
Well, it was fun. I appreciate the chance to speak and talk, and it was a great hour well spent in I believe. I enjoyed it very much, ST. Thank you for having me on.
I'm ST Patrick. This is the Midnight Rider News Show. We'll be right back.
He's the godfather of reality television, and now he has taken the reality of the JFK assassination straight to the establishment media in part 2 of the Jim Garrison tapes. John Barber is a pioneer, a conversationalist, a storyteller, and a friend of truth seekers worldwide.
Hi, this is John Barber, writer-director of the American Media and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy. If you want to know how I continue to challenge the media elites in the name of Jim Garrison's legacy, listen to episode 10 of the Midnight Rider News Show.
I was reminded of something today. There's a cycle of abuse in these truth communities. And much like a battered wife who keeps seeking validation from the husband, and much like a child who spends their life waiting for the love of an abusive parent, these communities have an abusive relationship with the mainstream media. The researchers who have done the best work, or the writers who have done the best books, or the filmmakers who created the best films, they deserve the power of validation. Seek it from them. We seem so impressed when the New York Times mentions something minutely conspiratorial. If Tucker Carlson runs 2 RFK Jr. stories in a week, we praise him. If they offer us any nugget of hope, we genuflect and say, "Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Isn't that great?" And it's really the most laughable when the Washington Post, who spent 40 years spinning the Watergate and Pentagon Papers stories to be victories for its own self-written history, when they do it, I mean, it's just unbelievable. No, I'm not impressed that they wrote one decent story this year. I'm really not. And I'm surely not going to thank them. You know, there are some people out there that I trust. I like Black Op Radio. I like the Lone Gunman podcast. Kennedy's and King does some wonderful work. I love Consortium News. I'm always impressed with what Edward Curtin writes. I like quite a few pieces by Caitlin Johnstone. I like some of what RT does on television. And then there are a few good magazines as well. Those are important outlets for me. The reason why the Washington Post or CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or even your local paper, the reason why those remain valuable is that too many of us look to them for validation when they are abusers of truth and truth seekers. And yes, listen, I get the argument. Well, maybe they are, but they did a good job on this story. Well, okay, and the abusive husband, he has to have enough good days for the battered wife to stay and still believe that there's hope. She has to still believe that there's a place called hope. So every day can be violent and filled with vitriol, but the abusive husband has to show the battered wife some glimpse of what it could be like, you know, if she just behaved and stepped in line. That's what keeps her in. And that's the abuse. That's the psychological aspect of the abuse. Lynn Kolodny telling me he likes a story I did is much more important to me than having it validated by the Chicago Tribune. His work is more valuable to me. And I'd rather have praise from Jim Hogan than the Washington Post. And to get the respect of my compadres at the CDPR is much more important to me than getting respect from Anderson Cooper, Rachel Maddow, Sean Hannity, and Wolf Blitzer. Therefore, what we really need to do now is to reorder important media outlets in our mind and in our community. Who do we really like? Who do we really need? And who do we really respect? When you allow the corporate media the power to validate your beliefs or your work, you have misplaced a core part of this mission. From the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight, I wish you peace.
Midnight Rider News and the Midnight Rider News Show are copyright 2019 by St. Patrick. All rights reserved. You can email the show at midnightridernews@gmail.com. You can follow us on Facebook at Midnight Rider News Show. All of our archives are free and can be found at midnightridernews.com. Deep Truth Journal can be followed on Facebook at Deep Truth Journal and on Twitter at DTJ Magazine.